welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. Delighted to be with you. It's Friday, it's not Tuesday. You probably already know that. More on that here in a moment. As we get started, though, I do want to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. And if you're listening to the episode and you don't already realize this, you can watch these episodes as well. We are now on YouTube. We have been about 8 months, I think. So if you want to see what the authors that you are listening to actually look like and watch the episodes, you can do that, or you can absolutely continue listening to them on audio. Just know that I keep forgetting sometimes that I will make references to things that are visual, and forgetting that the audio listeners don't necessarily know what it is I am referring to. So I apologize for anything I've done that in the past and anything I do that going forward. Just a blanket apology. But as we also get started, I do want to remind you that you can support the podcast in a financial way by going to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or a donation if you would like to as well. You can also leave a question or a comment. Always happy to engage with those. I can do that, or I will do that, at the beginning of the episode following receiving those questions. Love interacting with y'all, so please do that, whether there or on social media. But if you do want to support the podcast and the entire network, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info, leaving a tip or a donation. It is greatly appreciated. All of the support that you have given this podcast, whether that's past, present, or future, always greatly appreciated, whatever form that support has taken, is taking, or will take in the future. I hope you had a good week. I cannot believe that we're into the last week of January. By next Saturday, it'll be February 1st, which is crazy because my brain insists on saying, hey, guess what? We're 1/12 of the way through 2025. Why does it need to do that to me? But it's been an interesting week for a lot of reasons. You can fill in the blanks on why it might have been interesting for you, but it's definitely been an interesting week. Interesting for the podcast because I'm speaking with Emily Bleeker today, and Emily is interesting in her own right, and she's written a lovely book. We're going to talk about that in a second, but as you know, my schedule is a little weird, and authors' schedule and then their interviews tend to be many, many months out. And so things happen, life happens, and sometimes things need to be rescheduled. Things come up, and that was the case with Emily. She contacted me over the weekend and said, is it possible that we can find a different time to do this? Sure, no problem. That's why the episode wasn't up on Tuesday, as it often would be. We're doing it today. Excellent. Cool. Absolutely cool. No problem there. Perfect. But then on my end, Emily, you are a saint. You are gracious. You are a lovely, lovely guest. I had the glitchiest of glitchy interviews ever. Part of it was technical. Part of it was the puppy. You're going to see that in the interview. Not the puppy, but where we pause because of the puppy. So it turns out that the puppy will not go to the bathroom for my husband, and he insists that I take him out. If my husband takes him out, he will just sit there and look up at my husband like, hi, what are we doing out here? They can be out there for 5 minutes, 30 minutes. It doesn't matter. He'll come in and then pee on the floor. I told my sister yesterday that potty training a puppy feels like the worst version of an Easter egg hunt. Instead of walking around the house looking for beautifully decorated eggs, I am walking around the house constantly scanning for hidden piles of puppy poo. Good times. But so that was part of the issue on this interview when we met, and the puppy needed to go out, of course, in the middle of the interview. He'd been sleeping peacefully up until that point. And then there were technical issues. So be on the lookout for a little bit of a glitchy episode. I apologize for that. But please bear with them, because you do want to hear about this book, and you want to hear what Emily has to say about this book. Let me, in fact, tell you about this book. It is When We Were Enemies. The author is Emily Bleeker. I will give you the description. Camera-shy Elise Branson is different from the other women in her maternal line. Her mother is an award-winning actress. Her late grandmother, Vivian Snow, is a beloved Hollywood icon. But when Elise's upcoming wedding coincides with a documentary being made about Vivian, Elise can't escape the camera's gaze, and neither can her grandmother, even in death. It's 1943 when Vivian, a small town Indiana girl, lends her home front support to the war effort. As a translator in the nearby Italian POW camp, she's invaluable. As a celebrated singer for the USO, she lifts men's spirits and falls in love with a soldier. But beyond this all American love story is a shocking secret, one that is vital to keep buried if Vivian is to achieve the fame and fortune she covets. For Elise and Vivian, what's hidden and what's exposed threatens to unravel their lives. The heart-wrenching choices they must make will change them both forever. And so again, that is the description of When We Were Enemies. As you heard, it is dual point of view and dual timeline, contemporary and historical fiction with World War II. Emily and I talk a little bit in the interview about World War II novels not often taking place in the US. It's not where the center of the action was, but of course the war had an effect here, and there were things that I'm still learning about in terms of World War II history in the US, and I learned a lot from this book. Emily talks some about that research and what she learned as well. Very interesting in terms of Italian POW camp in Indiana, and maybe you knew about that, maybe you didn't, but it was something that I had known about, but more recently than I maybe should have, and learned more through this process. So if you are at all a fan of historical fiction or dual points of view, weaving together, which is done really well in this book, the weaving together of those two storylines, then you're definitely going to want to check out this book. But let's go ahead and let Emily talk about the book, and we'll get through the glitches, and we'll go from there. Again, it is called When We Were Enemies. The author is Emily Bleeker. Hi, Emily. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. We are going to talk about your novel, When We Were Enemies, among other things. But before we get to all of that, if you would take a few minutes just to share a little bit about yourself, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I this is When We Were Enemies is my seventh novel. I've been an author now for 10 years, just about. But I also am a mom. I have four kids, and I do improv in my spare time as well on a team in Chicagoland. And really, I like all things books, and I like all things theater too. So kind
Yeah.
of two pack.
Fun improv. That's the only thing. I mean, I understand the concepts of improv, but whenever anyone says improv, I think yes and. That's really
Yes, exactly.
so. So you can roll with the punches. I would think.
I try to. I try to.
Yeah. What's your favorite thing about improv?
Um, it's making up stories with other people, So writing is you're doing it by yourself, and improv is you're doing it live on stage in front of an audience. So it's collaborative. You learn to kind of twist and turn and figure things out on stage. It's made me better at drafting stories, honestly, because it's made me be willing to say yes and really explore like what would come next, kind of doing improv with myself on the page. So that's really fun. Plus, I really enjoy connecting with the audience, and
Mm,
that's an enjoyable thing for me as well.
nice. Thank you. Well, we're here to talk about books. So, When We Were Enemies, it's dual timeline, historical fiction part of it. Can you give an overview of that book?
Yeah, When We Are Enemies is about a grandmother and her granddaughter. So it is present day, and then it is Vivian Santini's story before she becomes famous. What I love about this story is that we, as the reader, know that Vivian becomes massively famous, but she doesn't know that. So her granddaughter Elise is then participating in a documentary that is about her grandmother's early life. And so she is going to get married in the same chapel that her grandmother got married in. And so we kind of see a back and forth between those two storylines, kind of filling in some blanks of Vivian Snow. That's what her name becomes when she becomes famous, of her early life and her origin story.
Right. So yeah, we get the dual timelines, but Vivian is no longer living in the contemporary timeline. So
That's right.
Elise doesn't have the opportunity to ask those questions. So she's kind of trying to figure things out, but we as the reader, of course, get, because we're lucky, we get more information than
Yes.
the characters get. What was your initial inspiration for the book?
Well, my grandmother, I was driving down the road with my dad in Mississippi, so it wasn't Indiana, which is where this was set, but he pointed to an exit. We were actually on the way to my grandmother's funeral, and he's like, your grandmother worked in a Italian POW camp at this exit and fell in love with an Italian priest. And then he just kept driving. And I was like, okay, what? Like, I wasn't even a writer at that time. Like, I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't know POW camps existed in the US. And so I had so many questions. And so that kind of just stuck in my mind, where I was like, I want to know more about this. I want to know more about this story. So my grandmother's story, they were completely platonic, but he continued to write to her over the years, this Italian priest that she got to know while he was in the POW camp, and he would draw pictures on postcards and then send them to her with messages. So that I just really, really had a lot of imagination around, so it kind of came together for me as I did more research and learned more about POW camps and their role in World War II.
Yeah. Geez, Grandpa, way to just drop that little tidbit of information and keep on driving. That is the best story. I've heard authors talk before about bits of family history, lore, legend, fact, everything in between, that has become the basis for books. And I'm always slightly envious of that, because I don't think my family has anything that's that interesting in its past. And if we do, we're not the type of family that's ever going to talk about it. So I'm never going to hear about it. So I'm always a little envious. But this, I think, was really fascinating. I mean, what a way to find out, and what an interesting thing to find out about a grandparent. And it's really easy to think of grandparents as just always having been old, never having been young, right? And then to find out possible love story scandal, not in this case, but to have it be the basis of a book, I think is really cool. We're going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about what I mentioned in the opening about World War II history here in the US. You are listening, or you're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Well, Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Emily Bleeker. Your second and final reminder to please go to gsmcpodcast.info if you want to help this podcast and the entire network in a financial, monetary, however you want to put it, fashion. This podcast doesn't happen without your support, whatever support that might be. So thank you as always. But if you do want to help it out in a very specific way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info and leave a tip or a donation. Thank you as always. Before the break, Emily was talking about her initial inspiration for this book, which I think is fascinating and love that story. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Emily. And there's so many World War II novels out in the last few years. It's very popular, but not very many that focus on the U.S. And obviously that's not where the action was centered. The theaters of war were elsewhere. But as you said, yes, there were prisoner of war camps. I did an interview a couple years ago about one that was in New Orleans that I didn't know about. So I learned that, didn't know there was this one that you are referencing. We were talking a little bit before we started recording that I grew up in Montana. There was an Italian internment camp actually in Missoula, near where I grew up. So I knew about that and the Japanese internment, but not as much about the prisoner of war camps. So that must have been a lot of rabbit holes for you for research.
Oh, absolutely. And the interesting thing is that the POW camps treated the prisoners better than the internment camps did, because they were trying really, really hard to follow the updated Geneva Conventions from World War I. And they were like, if we hold really strong to these, then maybe our men will be treated well overseas, and also is a little bit of a propaganda tool for these prisoners, saying, look how good we are, look how generous we are, look, we're not what we've been painted to be. So and honestly it worked. A lot of the prisoners of war wanted to stay in the United States and ended up staying in the United States and really left with a positive outlook. It was When We Are Enemies is named that because Italy did switch sides. So there was this pocket of time that they were our enemy and then they became our allies.
Right.
But I found that very interesting. Like that part of it was fascinating for me, especially because our own citizens didn't get treated as well as our prisoners did it during that time.
Yeah, I remember in the other book, it was, I believe, a German prisoner of war camp, and some of the German prisoners were able to just leave and go out during the day and be in the city. And I thought, well, wait, that seems odd on a couple of levels, especially when you have, like you said, our own citizens not being treated with the same consideration.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was fascinating to learn. I got to go visit the POW camp that I wrote about at Camp Atterbury, and they had a whole museum there, and it was very interesting to learn about, and also how the community at first really did not like the idea of having prisoners there. But then as the prisoners came and worked for them, because they worked the fields, they really took the place of the labor that was lost to the war. And they were paid, and not very much, but they were paid for their labor. But as they got to know them, it really became the community embraced them in their own way too, where especially once the tide shifted and the Italian prisoners switched sides. Now, then the camp became a German POW camp, which was slightly different, but even then the rules, like you said, were fairly lax.
Interesting. Yeah, we could have the entire conversation on this, just because I think it's fascinating. But let's talk a little bit more about Elise and Vivian. We get both of their points of view. So what about each of them as a character do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, I think Vivian, what I really enjoy about Vivian is that she has this desire to be out there in the world, but she's been raised in a very traditional home, and she's very people pleasing. She has a mother who is mentally ill, who it is a big secret for their family. There's a lot of shame and rejection that she feels in particular around her mother being in a mental institution. And so like seeing her battle her traditional upbringing of you should be home, you should take care of your family, don't want for more. And then the thing that inside is driving her inside of her to keep moving forward. I love that part of Vivian. Like, I really, really enjoy that about her. And then Elise, she is the third generation of this family line, and everybody else in the family after Vivian has had some run-in with fame or continues to be famous, including her own narcissistic mother. And
Mm-hmm.
Elise has decided that she does not want to be a part of that. She doesn't want to be on screen. She doesn't want to take advantage of this of the nepotism that is involved here, though she is a PR agent for famous people. So I would say she still has some taken
Right.
advantage of some of those benefits. But I like that about her, that she is now like, I have seen what fame had, the negative side of fame, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of and she had a close relationship with her grandmother. So it's not like she didn't know her at all. She had a close relationship with her grandmother. She had a partner who was famous, but ended up passing away. So she kind of had a brush with all of this, and
Yeah.
she got to make a decision about how she wanted to move forward.
Yeah. And they're kind of, I don't know if they're opposite sides of the same coin, but they're interesting because they are, a couple of generations apart. So you've got Vivian, who, when we know her, is not yet famous, but she wants to potentially be famous. She wants to entertain, she wants to perform. And then you've got the middle with Elise's mom, who is very famous, and everything that goes with that, because she's an interesting character. But then you've got Elise, who is kind of on the other side, and so she's seen the two generations before her, and she's trying to figure out, okay, what does this all mean for me then?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, so, and it is also interesting to have Elise in the contemporary timeline and Vivian, because it's so easy to think as we would think, or even as Elise would think, about the decisions that Vivian makes, because it's a very different time period for her, and she does have the father, and she makes some choices for her personal life that we as the reader might think, what are you? In fact, I was thinking, I'm just kind of yelling at the page, no, 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 no.
Right. Right. And it was a different time, not even just being raised in a traditional
Yeah.
Italian immigrant family. Like, that was something that I really tried to express as clearly as I could, that like, when that women didn't have a lot of choices. And the only reason they had choices at that time was because the men were away at war. It was this pocket of time that gave them independence. And then that independence went away once the men came home. But we don't get to that in this story. It is just this pocket of time. It's the only reason why she is able to have any kind of freedom.
Yeah.
And truly, marriage is the only way was the only way, one of the only ways to gain any kind of independence, especially during that time period for a woman.
Yeah, and there's one line in there, I'm not going to quote it correctly, but there's a character, a secondary character named Carly, I think, and you write the line that she's a single woman, but because she's a widow, she can operate in the world in a different way, like a married woman. But so she kind of has the best of both worlds. Like, obviously not the best of things because her husband's dead, but like that gives her a different level of being able to operate in the world.
Yeah, it's the closest that she could become to being a man at that time.
Yeah, yeah, which is just crazy. Um, so were there any particular challenges in writing dual points of view, dual timeline?
It was my first time that I wrote. The way that I wrote this was I just wrote the two stories separately. And then I kind of wove them together. And I started out writing them as like back and forth, back and forth. And then I realized I needed these stories. I knew how they fit together, so I didn't need to worry that they weren't going to fit together, but I needed to get fully into each of the characters individually before putting them back together. So once I figured that out, it actually became a lot easier to write the story than trying to make my brain bounce back and forth between timelines.
That was abrupt. I know. I get it, because at that point out came both dogs and my husband. I should have left it in because you could have seen the dogs. Actually, the old man dog is sleeping, but this one's not. He just woke up again and is making his appearance because that's what he does. He is I think he likes it. I think he's an attention hog. He's not, but he's currently trying to go to sleep in my lap. So let's see if that happens. But yeah, at that point, everyone came out. This one needed to go to the bathroom. Emily was very gracious, and we took a quick break while I took the dogs out and we took care of business, as it were. But yeah, okay, so let's go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we're going to be talking about character development. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review / Potty Training the Puppy podcast. Seems to be what it's turning into. Before the break, Emily was talking about writing this novel and the fact that it's a dual timeline, dual points of view, writing those stories, weaving them together, etc. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Emily. When you sit down to write a new book, a new story, how much character development do you like to do before you start writing? Or do you prefer to let your characters evolve as you write, or is it a combination for you?
It's a combination. I have some idea before I get going, but really the character ends up writing themselves. And there are some times where I'll have something planned for a character where I suddenly realize, oh, wait, this is not what Elise would do. This is not what Vivian would do. This is what Emily thinks they should do, So, and I try and listen to them in those moments. And I try and make sure that these are authentic things that are happening in the story rather than something that I'm just pushing as the author, wanting a certain plot line to happen.
Yeah. And then obviously you've got Elise and Vivian, your main characters, your main points of view. Secondary characters, do they ever just kind of go off on their own? Is it the same with them? Do they kind of act unexpectedly?
Absolutely. And the big thing that happens with the secondary characters is that in general, they usually are a little bit more cardboard figure-y when I start, because they're not my main focus. So they actually come to life more so than even my main characters because I'm really getting to know them. Yeah. And so that's really fun and important. And a lot of times there will be certain things that happen as a result of that.
Sure. Yeah. And I think secondary characters are so interesting because they are secondary. They're not the main character. They're not the main focus, but they're incredibly important to the book because, they're around the main characters and the main character has to interact with them. So I feel like it's got to be an interesting challenge with secondary characters to not focus so much on figuring them out that you're kind of losing. I feel like I could get lost in any character, secondary or not.
Right. Absolutely. It definitely is. I don't really feel like I have a super struggle with getting lost in the secondary characters because they really feel like they're having a relationship with the main character. And so then it becomes just that interplay more so than it is about their POV,
Yeah. We talked a little bit about the research that you needed to do for the historical fiction aspect of the book, which sounds fascinating. Any particular research that you did for Elise's story?
Yeah, well, that also was included with part of going to Camp Atterbury. So the Operation Allies Welcome, I found incredibly inspirational and fascinating and a very clear parallel that existed. Like I did not manufacture that at all. And it was a really interesting and kind of beautiful experience to be able to see that firsthand. The operation wasn't still going on, but they also had that as part of the tour and the museum at Camp Atterbury. And to be able to see that the community also opened up and bonded with these refugees, these Afghan refugees, I really appreciated being able to see that and to go to the chapel. Both chapels, the POW chapel, but then the chapel where Elise was to be married and where her grandmother was married. I was able to go and visit that church as well. And that was really, really interesting for me. They let us do a full tour and like really just explore. I took pictures of literally everything, just because I found it so immersive being there. So that was my favorite, probably my favorite part of the research, because I did a lot of reading research, a lot of, that kind of stuff too, like tons, so many books on POW camps and Hollywood and all of that. But that was probably my most inspirational weekend trip, was going and exploring the town and then being able to tour the camp as well.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. You mentioned that there is a sequel of sorts that gives us more of a Vivian's story, When We Chased the Lights. I want to make sure I get the title correct. Can you talk a little bit about that book as well?
Yeah. I like to say that it's a companion book. They kind of hold hands. So it is the story of just Vivian Snow. It is the only entirely historical book that I've written without a dual timeline. And so it picks up where When We Were Enemies ends with Vivian, and then it tells you her fame story, the rest of her life story. And it's kind of framed with, remember those postcards I talked about that my grandmother got from the Italian priest? It's framed, so we haven't talked about Trombello. Father Trombello was a friend that Vivian made, an Italian priest that she became very close friends with from the Italian POW camp when she was still Vivian Santini. And they remain friends. And then it is the story that kind of fits in with all of the postcards that he then sends to her over the years, and their friendship and their throughout her life.
I didn't even ask, does your family still have those postcards?
No, that's very unfortunate. We don't have those. I did search for them. I only have one cousin on that side of the family, and she has a lot of my grandmother's things, but she didn't have that. No.
Oh, bummer.
I know.
Actually, you bringing up Father Trumbull makes a good point. I was going to ask you, because there's two priests in this story, and one in each timeline. Sometimes writing priests or pastors or any type that it can present difficulties. We get some of it with Elise when she first meets the priest in her time period, and she she says something that she thinks is completely inappropriate because they're held to a different standard. So what's it like to write a character like that, where there's so many expectations about that role?
I did as much research as I could, because I was not raised Catholic, but I was raised very religious. So I kind of looked at it in that way, where I was like respectful. I wanted to be very respectful while still looking at the more dramatic and interesting elements of these friendships or relationships with people of faith, someone who's so devoted. So then what I did after I wrote it is I sent it to my very, very Catholic friends, because I am from Chicago and my husband is also Catholic. And I was like, all right, now tear it apart. Like, tell me what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and that really helped me a lot, was having some readers who are willing to go through and give me their feedback, and, for me to go back and double check. And then I did have a sensitivity reader as well, to go through and make sure that those elements were addressed appropriately.
Yeah. You can see there at the end of that segment that the second bit of technical difficulties started. Tried to take care of that, had issues, but we were talking about, in this case, writing two different priests in both timelines, and how sometimes it can be maybe a challenge, maybe not. It depends on a lot of different factors. Writing what can be easily made into characters that can easily be made into stereotypes. And we're going to pick this conversation up when we come back from the break, because I've spoken about it a little bit before. So if you are a longtime listener of the podcast, you may or may not know this about me, but there's a reason that whenever there's a character in any kind of pastoral setting, such as a priest or a pastor, I have personal opinions. And so more on that when we come back. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Emily Bleeker. Before the break, Emily was talking about the two priests that are in, there's a priest in each of the timelines that interact with Vivian and Elise. So she was talking about that. Just a quick reminder about that conversation as I make my follow-up comments. Let's return to the conversation with Emily. Well, from my own point of view, it's not something I talk about a lot on this particular podcast, but I have a Master's of Divinity from Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary. So I'm not Catholic, but Lutheran is very close. And so I went to seminary with many, many people who are now pastors. And I will tell you that I don't know a single one of them who has not dropped the F-bomb at some point in my life. They are the foul-mouthed, tattooed, like. So whenever they're portrayed as like human, I always I'm appreciative of people that write them and don't just kind of, you said cardboard cutout earlier, so I'm appreciative of that. But back to Vivian's story. Did you always intend to write a companion book, or did that come later?
I've never written a companion book or a sequel, but her story felt unfinished. And a lot of readers have even said that before they knew that there was going to be another book. They're like, what about the rest of her story? And so I started writing the rest of her story without knowing if it was going to be published through my same publisher. I was like, this story needs to happen, whether or not I do it myself or it is published through Lake Union. And it was picked up by Lake Union and published by Lake Union, which I'm really grateful for because they do a fantastic job. But it was something that it spilled out of me. I felt like I knew her story, and I knew that it needed to be told. And so I put it down on paper, and I'm so glad I did. It's one of my favorite books I've ever written.
Oh, wonderful. And they're both currently out, right?
Yep, they're both out. They're both out.
Perfect. I always like when I find books that if they're a series or even connected, that you can read them all at once. You don't have to wait. That's always a nice thing as a reader. What are you working on currently?
Actually, I'm just finishing up a book that'll be coming out this October. It's called Good Days, Bad Days, and so it's a dual timeline as well. It's about a woman who has been estranged from her parents because she was taken away by CPS when she was 15 years old from her parents' hoarded house. And her parents never cleaned the house, so she was never able to go home. She ironically becomes a home improvement guru and kind of just never goes back home until her mother is put in memory care, and her father says that he's ready to clean the house out because her mother was the hoarder. So she goes home and she finds that when her mother is in a state of dementia, that she's suddenly able to connect with her. She suddenly is able to know a different version of her than the one who is angry that she never came home and who had become so mired in her mental illness and her hoarding that she wasn't able to be a mother. So it's kind of that balance. But the good days are ironically bad days for the main character, and then the bad days are good days where she can connect with her mother.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. You said you've been writing about 10 years. Is it something that you always wanted to do? Did you come to that decision later in life? How did that path work for you?
Yeah, I didn't know I was a writer. I was a teacher. I taught the academically talented and gifted program in my school district, and we did a writer's workshop, and I wrote along with the kids. And then I was a kindergarten teacher, and I just kind of kept up with writing in my spare time. But then I had cancer when I was in my 20s, and I was like given a 30% chance of turning 30. And so when I did turn 30, I had like these goals for my 30s, and one of them was to write a novel. I never, ever thought I would even try to get it published. But after I wrote it, I let some people read it, and they were like, you should try and get this published. And it sounds simple. It took several years for it to get to the point of publication, but that did end up being my first published novel, Wreckage. So I feel like I kind of stumbled into this career. I don't think it was something that I ever truly thought that I could do. Like it's something that I feel like was a gift that came to me. It was something that came out of the worst time in my life that, then I was able to pursue and move forward with. And now I find it's my job, it's my passion, and I feel very lucky to be able to do it every day. So it definitely did come out of nowhere, but I'm glad it did.
Wow. Yeah, that is a new story. I've not heard that. I have not heard that. So, that's wonderful. And you're here, and that's good. You're
Yeah.
healthy. That's even better. So wonderful. Congratulations. Um, from your own experience, what advice would you give to someone who is thinking maybe they do want to write a novel?
Write it. That's always what I say. Like just start writing. You just, you can't edit or improve what isn't written. So go for it, write it. And then also the second thing is after writing it, be a really good listener. Ask for feedback and be a good listener. But and then I would say the third thing is that this is something that is accessible to people that didn't go to school to become a writer. Like I know so many of the authors I know did not go to school for writing.
Yeah.
So it really is on you. If you want to do it, sit down, write it, and finish it, and then work on it.
Yeah. Thank you. When you take the time to read just for you, not necessarily for research or anything like that, favorite authors, favorite genres?
Oh, when I'm writing a book, I can't read fiction. So I love nonfiction. I am constantly reading some sort of nonfiction. So right now I'm reading The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. It's a memoir about Ruby Frankie's daughter. So I'm really, really, really into reading or really listening to, I'll be honest, I do audiobooks.
Yep, me too.
Most of the time. So that's my favorite. And then when I can read for fun, I'll read for work too. I read a lot of contemporary fiction and women's fiction, like my colleagues or for blurbs, and those are very, very, very enjoyable. But the thing that I really dig into for fun are like dystopian, even though it's not even really a thing that much anymore. I love like young adult dystopian novels. I will read any.
Yeah, yeah, you don't see them as much anymore, do you? They were just sort of prolific there for a few years, maybe even a decade. Lots and lots of dystopia happening in the world.
I know. I don't know what it is, but I love them. So that's kind of my fun thing to read.
Your escapism. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I know you have a website, so if people want to know more about you, the books, etc., share the website and any social media that you're active on.
Sure. It's just emilybleeker.com, and you can find me Emily Bleeker or Emily Bleeker author on pretty much any platform.
Okay, thank you. Emily, we've talked about a few things. We've had technical difficulties. You've hung in there with me. I appreciate it. But is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure you highlighted during this time?
I don't think so. Even with all the technical difficulties, I had a blast.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Emily for joining me to talk about When We Were Enemies, but also thank you to Emily again for the patience and the graciousness and the putting up with the crazy technical issues and the fact that my camera did finally I couldn't deal with the flickering anymore, and I apologize to you for the flickering. I hope it wasn't too crazy and that you were able to just focus solely on Emily. Neither Emily nor this book deserved the technical glitches of this interview. They deserve better. Please do not hold that against this book. It's it's companion book, not quite a sequel, but it's a companion book. I have that on my wish list. I've got it on my Audible listening wish list. It is available on Audible, so if you are an audiobook listener, then that is a place that you can get it. I am looking forward to hearing Vivian's story. But again, if you're a fan of World War II historical fiction, if you're a fan of dual points of view, dual timelines, families, family history, family secrets, interweaving of family stories and timelines that run parallel to each other as very compelling female characters are figuring things out in their own lives, then this is definitely a book that you should check out. And then maybe you will want to check out the companion novel as well. Let me just double check that I'm getting the name right again. When We Chased the Lights. I don't know why my brain will not retain that information. When We Chased the Lights is the companion novel. Definitely check them both out. They're both available, so you can read them at once. No waiting, which is always great. So thank you again. Thank you again to Emily for joining me. Thank you to you, as always, for joining me. It is greatly appreciated. I hope that you will join me for my next interview when I will be speaking with author C.H. Hooks about his book, Can't Shake the Dust. It is Southern Gothic. It is coming of age. Looking forward to talking to C.H. About this book. So please do join me for that interview. Should be next week on Tuesday, but you just never know. That's why, if you're not doing so already, you should like, follow, and subscribe, because when you do those things on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on, you're going to get notified when a new episode comes out. No guesswork. When things are glitchy, you're still going to know when there are new episodes, and that can be very helpful. So please do like, follow, and subscribe, if for no other reason than that. But it also does help the algorithm. It helps get the podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. Also, leaving a positive review is incredibly helpful. Do that for your favorite authors as well. Please do it for the podcast. Do it for your favorite authors. It does help all of us out. Those algorithms are very, very important, and we need all the support we can get, and thank you for that support. You can follow the podcast on social media, currently on Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok. Again, don't know what's going on there, but we're there as long as it's there, and as if we add any other social media in the crazy upheaval that is social media anymore, I'll be letting you know that as well. But whatever platform you might be on, come see if the podcast is also on that platform. If it's not, let me know, and maybe I'll see about getting the podcast on that platform so that I can interact with you lovely listeners / watchers / readers. It is time to wrap up this episode. I'm getting scratchy throat. It's been a crazy episode to get out to you, and I'm glad that I was able to do so, because again, good book deserves to have an episode and lovely new readers such as yourselves. I hope you've had a great week. I hope that you have something great coming up this weekend, but no matter what's going on with your weekend, you know my wish for you is that you find yourself plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to